Hello, everyone. Welcome to another Peaceful Solution Character Education Certification class. Everyone can be seated that's coming in. Welcome all of you who are watching overseas and in other countries. Thank you for joining us also online. And once again, we're going to be in the self-control unit. That's the third unit of the junior high series. And once again, I can't stress enough, if you haven't downloaded the free PDF file, do so. It's a teacher's manual. By now, you should have been able to download. And if you have any problems, please let us know. The character unit, the acceptance unit, and the self-control unit. And all of those should be free of charge and are free of charge, and that you should be able to download them in the teacher's manual. Not the students, but the teachers, because that's what you're really needing for the certification course, is the teacher's manual. And of course, we're going to start in our units here. We're going to turn back over here to page 10 really quickly. We're going to read something that we've covered numerous times in this book so far. William covered it a little bit. Catan covered it. David covered it also. And we're going to read it again. And I brought some information on that skyscraper that I was telling everyone about. And we're going to compare it to what life in general can be like. And we can all, use similitudes and consider and thinking about how these things compare and examples that come forth. But here on page 10, notice at the very top it says, developing and practicing self-control will enable you to develop many other positive traits. So it opens up a gate for us. It actually gives us something. It's like a key or something that allows you to do more. If you can imagine a muscle, it strengthens, you can pick up more. A mind that learns more, learns how to make correct decisions, can handle more. But notice once again, self-control is the foundation of a positive character. And turn back to page 4, and hopefully you have these already marked in your notes. Page 4 in Review and Rewind, right up above where you see Review and Rewind, you'll see a paragraph there. Notice it says self-control is the foundation of moral behavior. And remember, morals are rules. So what it is saying is self-control is the foundation of behavior that is according to the rules. In other words, someone who adheres to the rules, they know that the rules keep them safe. They know that the rules keep society safe. Well, that's a moral person, and that requires self-control. And turning back over to page 3, if you look at the very bottom paragraph, the very bottom, it says, in the first chapter, you will learn what self-control is and why it is an important trait for everyone, once again, everyone, to acquire and practice on a consistent basis. So notice this is something we always have to put forth some work at. You also learn that developing self-control begins with controlling your thoughts and making choices that are positive and moral. Doesn't mean negative thoughts doesn't come into our mind, but our choices are positive. We contemplate, we consider, use similitudes, and we come to conclusions that bring no harm to ourselves, someone else, or the environment. Notice it also says you will also learn that developing self-control begins with controlling your thoughts and making choices that are positive and moral. Self-control is the most important character trait. I hope everyone has that underlined. Underline it, circle it, highlight it, put like arrows going to it, because if it's the most important character trait, that's something we need to know. Being respectful and responsible and compassion and humility and all those other positive character traits that go along with it, well, this is the most important. And we're going to learn why over a series of classes as we go through this unit on why it's so important. But once again, self-control is the most important trait you can develop because it applies to all aspects of your life. And once again, it is the foundation of a positive character. So someone that doesn't have self-control or that is not practicing self-control, well, they're out of control. And there's no way they will ever be able to develop a positive character. A positive character, you can have a person who goes according to the rules and seems like a great guy and never seems to step out of line. But then when the opportunity comes to take advantage of someone and kind of steal some money, or, well, I think I've I drank a lot tonight, but I can still drive. I got the keys right here in my hand. It'll do just great. And then wreck on the way home, damage something, hurt somebody, or someone that just loses self-control for an instant and takes someone's life or hurts somebody. That is what we're talking about. These decisions that can be made, feels like instantaneously, feels like without thinking, but we already discussed how we're always thinking. But really, it's what we're making of ourselves, the ingredients we're putting within ourselves, this makeup of this knowledge, this database we have up here, where we can actually pull memory from and remember. Touch the stove, it's hot, burns your hand, don't like it. One thing I can remember, every time I hear the word super glue, I can't stand the feel of that stuff on my fingers. It annoys me. And I remember the first time I experienced it, I realized you can't scrape it off. It just has to wear off. And it annoyed me because I just could not stand that feel. But there's certain things that we can hear, and they bring up memory or thoughts that someone has put in our mind. But not all of them are true. People can bring up certain words, and you can think very negative things. Doesn't mean that they're really negative. I remember some people when we were traveling to other countries, I'd say Native American. Well, to them, they were people that were kind of savages, because that's how they're portrayed in movies. And the cowboy that wore the white hat was always the great guy, and the one that wore the black hat was the bad guy. And they were always trying to hurt the poor cowboys. But that's not true at all. That's just a fictition that's been put into somebody's mind. That's a story that someone told from a figment of their imagination, but it categorized a lot of people. Like I've told people, Native Americans aren't like that at all. My ancestral bloodline comes from Native Americans, and I didn't see anybody with any hatchets trying to scalp people or anything like that when I was growing up, and I grew up, not far from Cherokee Reservation. So, I'm pretty sure I would have noticed that, and I would have known about it because I wouldn't want to go around it. But these decisions that we make, and once again, just consider if you practice self-control, and every day you're practicing self-control, and you just keep working at it. And then one day you wake up, things aren't going your way, and you throw your hands up. And as the world tends to say sometimes, they say, the hell with it. Today I'm going to do what I want to do. There's a lot of people that lose their jobs, a lot of people that lose their marriages, and a lot of people that lose their lives that just decide in a couple of seconds, couple of minutes, are letting these thoughts run through their mind, replaying them, might not even be very factual, but they throw everything away very quickly. And it's not recovered very easily. And you can be 10 years old, 15 years old, you can be 30, 40, 50, 60, 70, 80, 90. It doesn't matter. You can still throw it all away. But our foundation has to be set very firmly for us. And I want to read you this very quickly, and it's called the Millennium Skyscraper there in San Francisco. And think about this as your character when you're building it, and when you don't firm that foundation up, well, you can look and, man, look how beautiful this thing is. This skyscraper, look how beautiful. These condos sold for millions of dollars a piece, and just look at the beauty as it falls and falls and falls. They're even worried that if it keeps sinking, well, I'll read the article and you'll see. You don't think about certain things when it comes to buying a condo and a skyscraper, but evidently these things are a huge issue. And it says, San Francisco's luxurious new skyscraper is tilting 26 inches. The 645-foot tall Millennial Tower will continue tilting at a rate of 3 inches per year and has already sunk between 17 and 18 inches into the ground. And just to give you an idea about this, it's not like it's standing by itself. It's right here. Okay, if it falls, there's plenty of things to catch it, but I don't think it was intended for that to be something to catch other buildings. It's going to be like a domino effect. Well, think about, this is complete. Most of it's sold, but it didn't start off right. The foundation that should have been there wasn't there. And now they're even saying that they're finding that it's not just that building, there's some other buildings there on the bay sinking. Probably was the wrong place to put the stuff to begin with. You know, when the water's right out there, that gives you a kind of a mindset. There's probably water not too deep underneath the ground. It's probably not too solid. You know, so if you see something that doesn't look very solid or very fundamental, very positive, question it. You know, is this something that's going to bring harm to someone else or the environment? Well, here you have these people, they've built it, it's completed, money's been made, you know. It says here that with the 14th century Leaning Tower of Pisa to impress with all its tilt, well, there's a modern day building that slants even more. So think about that, it slants more than the Tower of Pisa. San Francisco's Millennium Tower, one of the glitziest residential buildings in the city, is now tilting more than 2 feet west and continues to tilt at a rate of 3 inches per year and is sinking into the ground. In fact, it has already sunk between 17 and 18 inches. If the problem isn't fixed, the building could eventually tilt 40 inches, the maximum it needs to function and probable for the elevators and plumbing to work. So it's tilting so bad, they're worried the elevators will no longer go up and down, nor will your plumbing drain, because the building's going to be tilted. Imagine a skyscraper and it tilts so bad the plumbing is no longer has its drop. I think I'd be moving, but there are people that, you know, it's safe, it's okay. It's 58 stories, and once again, 645 foot tall, and it debuted in 2009, so that's how old it is. Now, if you could think about that, with a person's character, and you start off in the wrong area, if you never change, you know, it can look beautiful. It can look extravagant. It can look nice. It can look desirable. But when it's, 13 years old? 12 years old? And the older it gets, the more it breaks. It's actually self-destructing. It needs no help to finally collapse. It's going to do it on its own over time. That's barring an earthquake. Whenever our life is like that and we start off on a very wrong path, we have the option for us. You can't pick this building up, transplant it, and set it back down. We can our character. We can evaluate where we're at, what we're doing, the environment we're in, and if we need to sometimes pick up and transplant, get out of a very, you know, it can be a problematic relationship. It can be a area which we live, environment with which we work, a relationship that's not going anywhere according to the rules. Those are things you have to evaluate. It doesn't mean you can't fix certain situations, but sometimes you have to get yourself out of it. And usually you have to get with someone that's from the outside looking in. That's about the only time you can really figure it out. Because, you know, with this right here, in this other article, I'll tell you about it briefly instead of reading into it too much. There were engineers, and they decided, I want to make sure I get it right. They decided they wanted to put, they wanted to put 18 piers that go down, concrete piers that go down into the earth 250 feet. And that's what the engineers came up with. So they hired a contractor, and they told the contractor, this is what we want you to do. Well, after they were in the process and completed the work, it sank even faster. And the engineer's excuse was, well, we hired them to do it. We didn't stand there and tell them how to do it. Well, engineers usually oversee the process to make sure it's done according to the specs of what the engineer idea was. It's kind of like our character. We need someone overseeing us to make sure that our character is being molded and shaped into that ideal condition. And we all need that. And that's what we're supposed to be for each other. No matter where we live, that's what we're supposed to be even for each other, to help each other, not to criticize, put down. You know, if to make ourselves feel better, we have to constantly put someone else down, that doesn't build anything. That tears down even more. It's like the building is tilting, and we just keep pushing on it. Push on a little more. That makes my building look more straight. You know, as my building tilts right along with it. think about that as we get into our lesson plan tonight. Because we talked about guarding our mind. If you'll turn back over there to page 11, this guarding our mind, I want to read from the first paragraph once again to get our minds pretty much set in realizing we're responsible for us. And you look over to the side note here. Once again, it's in the gray box. Notice it says, you are the only one who can control what you think. You're the only one. And remember, we've already covered through the character unit and the acceptance unit, the environment we put ourselves in, the entertainment media we feed our brains with, the education we allow, could be positive education or negative education, all of these are part of it. It's not just thoughts entering our mind and, well, I thought that, I allowed myself. Well, what brought those thoughts in? And never forget about the soda that was flashed on the screen just for a second, and everybody got up to go get the soda. Well, what other things are flashed on the screen for more than a second? And it gets the attention of people, and it puts thoughts into people's minds. Well, part of controlling those thoughts are controlling what goes into the mind. It's the same way as our bodies. You can see a can of gasoline, and as long as you're putting it in your lawnmower or your vehicle or whatever gasoline goes in, you're just fine. You start drinking it, and it doesn't turn out too well. It's not meant to go there. There's a lot of things in society pretty much all society can say, these things aren't very positive to let your children watch this. But I know William covered this in detail. We'll put a rating system on the movies. And when your child's 13, they should be able to see, a little bit of it anyway. You don't want to take all the fun out. And then when they're 18, that's a whole new, they should be able to see everything by then. Yeah, they're old enough to get chlamydia, gonorrhea, syphilis. They're old enough to do all that stuff. Well, by the time they're 18 these days, they've already been through a lot. A whole lot. Abortions and everything else. But here at the very top of the page, it says, another key concept in developing self-control is to be aware. Notice, be aware, be watchful, look out, that your actions begin with your thoughts. But your thoughts didn't begin when it went boop up in your mind. What brought in those thoughts? What are we feeding into our minds? What are we allowing into our bodies? We can worry about, I can't eat that. That's unhealthy. But what are you watching? What are you doing with that? Notice it's very easy to say, I just did it. I wasn't thinking. We'll call that irresponsibility for right now. It's unintentional irresponsibility, I guess we could call that, if you're not educated to the point. But we'll get to that later in the responsibility unit, and we'll come back to this when we get there. But the truth is, we're always thinking. Thoughts enter our minds at the speed of light. Thoughts about ourselves, others, the things we need to accomplish, and the things we want. Remember the difference between the things we need and the things we want. These thoughts then lead to feelings, which in turn can lead to behavior. It is no surprise that sad thoughts make you feel sad, so how do people act when they feel sad? Many people mope, cry, or even isolate themselves from friends and family. But this is what I want you to underline and circle it and highlight it. Notice your thoughts are powerful. Your thoughts are powerful. And if you don't have it or don't remember it, draw an arrow over and put down acceptance, page 11, because remember, knowledge is power. And that knowledge comes from our database, those thoughts, the education we've allowed into our minds. And we'll get to it, but just so you have it, I'm not going to speak about what it says, but write down responsibility unit, page 11 also. Because there we also talk about how knowledge is power. And we'll get to that as we move forward. But once again, notice, do not underestimate the effects your thoughts can have on your feelings and behavior. If we can learn to control those thoughts that enter our mind, and it doesn't begin when the thought pops up, it begins by what we're feeding ourselves. What education are we allowing in? What things are we listening to? If you're hanging around your friends, as we covered in the character unit and the acceptance unit, remember what a friend is. A true friend doesn't try to get you to go to the mall and steal something. True friend doesn't get you to try to, here, take these drugs. Or as the one scenario we used in the character unit, here, sniff this glue. It doesn't hurt you. You know, and you would think common sense would tell somebody, if somebody just told me to sniff glue, obviously it hurt them because they're still sniffing glue. It's not normal. It's not healthy. You know, fumes are something you're supposed to wear, you know, certain types of mask. You're not supposed to stick your nose down in the bottle. That's not the idea. There are caution, you know, and I know, and I've got, someone asked me one time, a student asked me, you know, the caution labels that are on the side of things that are dangerous, they said, if it's so important, why do they write them so small? I thought, you know, that's a great question. I really don't know the answer to that. You would think when I was growing up, I remember seeing the skull and crossbones on things that was poisonous. I don't know that I see that anymore. I don't know that I'm paying attention enough to realize if I know in my business I deal with chemicals that are dangerous, and I don't see skull and crossbones, but I know what they are, and I know we have to ventilate. Even by the law, city codes say you have to ventilate. So once again, these are things where just keeping the rules keep us safe. But once again, our thoughts are powerful, and we can't underestimate the effect they have on our feelings and behavior, but we have to first understand, where do these thoughts come from? How are they getting into our minds? Look down at the last paragraph. So how do you know if your thoughts are positive or negative? You know, that's a question for ourselves. It's a question for our students. We've already covered this, but you still want to make sure you rehearse this, because knowing how they're positive and negative only starts building to, well, how did they get that way? But you first have to identify them. Ask yourself if they are harmful in any way. Positive thoughts uphold true moral principles. Now, that's the moral principles. That's the adherence to the rules. You know, true moral character, or a character that obeys the rules. They don't try to steal things. They're not trying to do things inappropriate. They're adhering to the rules. You know, instead of stealing the bicycle, they work to buy the bicycle. Negative thoughts, on the other hand, pave the way for destructive behavior. And if you could think about that, you know, it's if you think about what goes into paving a road and how much work goes into it, and it doesn't hurt to download a video for your students so they can actually see how this is one layer upon the next. When you pave a road, you know, it's not just throw the asphalt down. There's a whole process. And if you do the interstate, my heavens at the money that gets poured into that. Rebarb and all kinds of stuff. You can tell it's not the state paying for it, put it that way. But you see the process, and really show your students how these negative thoughts, they build and they build and they build. And it becomes, you know, you're talking about a road on the interstate, they get like that thick. And it's one layer upon another. And even the streets in the city is one layer upon another. And if you're paving your way here in negative character for destructive behavior, it's where we are doing things continually that are breaking the rules. And you'll hear a lot, well, I didn't break it, I just bent it a little bit. You know, bend but don't break. I didn't steal it, I just borrowed it. I'm going to take it back. When? Well, I don't know, I lost it. As soon as I find it, though, I'm going to take it back. You know, and these are the things that we get caught up into in society, and then it's, well, if nobody knows it's gone, hey, how's it really stealing if he never realized I took it? You know, it's okay. He didn't need it. We'll reason things to be okay that are very wrong. But once again, notice they are hateful, revengeful, and selfish. So guard your mind by distinguishing between positive and negative thoughts. Consider the types of feelings and actions your thoughts can lead to. So with that in mind, turn over to LP 1, page F, because we're going to be starting the next procedure. We just completed procedure 4 in the last class. We're going to be starting procedure 5 tonight, and we're talking about our thoughts and how these thoughts get into our mind, and we're going to really discuss some. We talked about it in the character and acceptance unit, and even in dealing with rejection, we talked about how our thought process and the way we look at ourselves. And that's really going to be a topic tonight that we're going to discuss. It's a topic that when you're teaching in a school, you really got to be mindful of how you word things, because there's a lot of teenagers that are really criticizing themselves needlessly. They're being overcritical of themselves. A lot of them are trying to figure out why it's going wrong. They just have nobody to really show them why it's going wrong. Everybody will tell them it's going wrong, but nobody shows them. You know, one of our Peaceful Solution teachers was given a testimonial one time in Washington, D.C. about his life. And he said, you know, my whole life I had somebody, many people tell me, you can't do that, you shouldn't do that. but no one ever taught them how to not do it until they found out about the peaceful solution. And that made a world of difference in their life. Instead of somebody saying, don't do that, or you can't do it, somebody finally said, let me show how you can stop doing that. And that meant a lot. That actually helped that person change their entire life. So here, once again, looking over Procedure 5, it says, have students read the section, be your own best critic. Once again, be your own best critic, not your worst. And also, it's not just about you. Control the way you think about others. These will be found on pages 12 and 14. And of course, notice page 13 is missing there, but we're going to cover that too. And it says, explain to students that negative thoughts can lead to poor choices and a lack of respect for themselves and others. Encourage students to keep their minds functioning at an optimal level by focusing on thoughts that can build a positive moral character. You know, the optimal level, that's the level it can process. You know, don't put something that fogs the mind in there. Get them thinking, get the gears turning about these thoughts and considering what we're teaching them. And, don't let their minds be all gobbed up with, it's very hard. A teenager can walk into a school and someone can just say, man, you look goofy. That can be like devastating to a person. Your teeth aren't straight. Your hair's crooked. Man, who cut your hair, by the way? Anyway, what, did your lawnmower break or something? And they'll say some very detrimental things, and to some people, these things are not just the first thing they've heard. It could have started with, get out of the bed, you loser. I got to take you to school. Get out of here. We try to consider, as teachers, what everybody's going through. And the people that, as the author of the Peaceful Solution said, your class should never move faster than your slowest student. And that doesn't mean, okay, everybody, Jimmy is not keeping up, so we're going to go as slow as him, and we'll be on his level today, okay? Doesn't mean that. It means, as a teacher, have empathy for your slowest student and bring everybody together. And that will help everybody move forward. So once again here, explain to students that negative thoughts can lead to poor choices and a lack of respect for themselves and others. Encourage students to keep their minds functioning at an optimal level. So once again, turning over to page 12 for the section entitled Be Your Own Best Critic, Not Your Worst. And it says, control the way you think about you. So this is about, you ever heard anybody say it's not about you? Well, right now this is about you. We'll get on to how the whole world's we're not the center of the universe, but right now we're talking about ourselves. It says, have you ever heard the saying, you're your own worst critic? Well, most of us are. We can really put ourselves down, especially when we act in a way that is disappointing. Well, disappointing to who? We're talking about ourselves. And if you've ever done something, fallen short, if you've ever disappointed somebody you look up to or somebody who you respect very highly, regard in a very high manner, and you see that you've disappointed them, that's something that can be, very hard to deal with. Doesn't mean you can't process it. And really, think about an individual that you can look to that has been a role model in your life, and think about how when they corrected you, if you did something wrong, broke something, misused something, something just didn't work out right, and then think about how you felt. Did they correct you in a positive way or a negative way? And how did you feel when you were corrected? And then consider how other people feel who are looking up to you when you correct them, either in a positive way or a negative way. And you can consider that if it's someone that you look up to and is your role model, and they correct you in a very negative way, that can be very hurtful and disappointing to the person. And if that's how we felt, doesn't mean we can't work through that and get through it. And sometimes people will call and apologize. They'll know what went wrong and see what went wrong. But we should consider how we felt when we deal with others, when we're correcting others. when we're guiding others and teaching others, because we know how much we didn't like it. We know how much it made us feel bad. Think about that when we deal with others. But notice here it says, although it's okay to be disappointed with our actions when we know we could have made a better choice, it's not okay to continually belittle our worth as human beings. You know, the old saying that I can't get anything right. Well, that's not true. You know, there's a lot of things that you can practice, and you're just never going to be able to do it. You know, I remember it was in the news to where there were death threats, and it was a football game a couple years ago where a field goal kicker for Chicago missed a field goal. And this was like a huge deal. There were people threatening to kill the man because he missed a field goal that would have sent the Chicago Bears to the Super Bowl. And when I first seen it in the news, I thought, why would they threaten the man with death? So obviously the football team cut him. I think it was for his own benefit to help him get out of Chicago. But there was I'll say restaurant owner who literally held a challenge for everybody that wanted to criticize this man. He set up the same scenario outside of his restaurant where anybody could come try to attempt the same, it was like 42, 43-yard field goal that he missed. And if anybody got it, they got a free meal a day for a year. And not a lot of people showed up. I think there was a couple hundred, and nobody come close to doing it. But yet all of these people were criticizing this man and talking about, you know, we should hang him, we should shoot him, we should do this, we should do that. You know, if you think about, this man was a professional sportsman who was making an enormous amount of money for kicking a football. And, you know, he had a very short part to play, short time that a kicker plays. And when he missed it, I think he probably already had 53 people that were his teammates looking at him in a very negative way to begin with. And I'm sure he felt bad because that was his profession. But when you think about how these people get to the point death threats enter their mind, you know, and then, well, I'm probably not worth it. And you think, nobody'd do that. Well, I tell you, I've got a story in my life where the way I was named, my father named me after 2 football players. And that's why my middle name is Markle. He named me after a Green Bay Packer field goal kicker. And I didn't know anything about the person. One day I thought, I just want to read about the guy he named me after. And I read that he became so depressed from sports, he actually attempted to drink battery acid to end his life. And I thought, man, how bad can that get? Everybody says that this is the life, play professional sports. And that was back in the 70s. But you think about these things, and we think that, man, these people got all the money. They got the best lives. Money doesn't solve problems. Money doesn't make you think better about yourself. You know, when people put negative thoughts in your mind, and I say put them in your mind with their words and their actions, it's up to us to process what we do with that. And we'll get much more into the anger and the depression, but please get that into your mind and get that into the mind of your students when you're teaching them. When someone puts a thought in your mind, that becomes your possession. You know, that thought, it's in your mind, you own it. It's up to you to process it. You can process it in a negative way, or you can process it in a positive way. But once again here, these choices that we're making. Continuing on this paragraph, it says, if you become disappointed with yourself, examine the thoughts and feelings that led you to act a certain way. Remember, because these thoughts lead to feelings. We need to stop and examine these things. Take a look at them. Nothing wrong with that. Then focus your thoughts on what you need to change in order to make better choices. Now, in doing this, when you focus your thoughts, sometimes, you know, like we compare it to glasses, you know, like I can still see everybody just fine without my glasses, but I can't see a word on this page. It's like a bunch of blur. But I can see everybody out there just fine. But when I put my glasses on, now I can see everything. You know, it comes into focus. It makes it better. Well, if you wear glasses, that's one way, and I've used my glasses. Here, put these on, you know. This is what it's like to come into focus and go out of focus. And my glasses I don't think they've helped many people come into focus. But, you know, when you get young people and we expect so much sometimes of people to make right choices that have never been educated. I'm not talking about people that have been taught and educated in proper conduct and have been set in an environment to learn. I'm not talking about them. I'm talking about a society, and it's not just children, this can be adults. We expect a lot of right choices made from people that have never been taught to make right choices. And then we as a society criticize those people when they don't make a choice that would have fit within the society. And it's always interesting whenever you take someone into court because they've committed a crime and it says you will be judged with 12 of your fellow peers. You know, these are people just like you. Okay, so they committed the same crime I did. You know, what kind of background do these people have? These people that are getting ready to judge me. And then that's what your lawyers do. They kind of critique them to see what they like and what they don't like. And, well, it's not really to see if you did something wrong or how long you should go to jail or what they're saying for. It's how can I get you out of this? Or how can I nail you with this? And the whole time you're kind of sitting there and you're being criticized as a defendant. Well, you know, you don't have to sit in a courtroom to be a defendant. That means to defend yourself. And if we do something that's wrong, you know, notice here it said we need to focus on those thoughts to help us make better choices. If we do something that's wrong, the first thing we have to do is admit we did something that's wrong. And getting that through the mind of a child can be a challenge, but then try to get that through the mind of an adult. Someone that's, I've been doing this my whole life. Well, you've been doing it wrong your whole life. Congratulations. Now you're going to learn how to do it right. I've heard that a couple times. You know, and it was true. It was true. I've learned a lot of things in my life and found better ways and correct ways to do them and found that it is much more beneficial and much more rewarding to do it a proper way. And I'm sure as I grow, I'll find more things like that through education. But this is where it talks about the focus. Make sure your class understands. That doesn't mean you're all by yourself in this. Go to a guidance counselor. Go to a trusted adult, as we brought out in the character unit, the acceptance unit. Go to a trusted adult, a guardian, a guidance counselor. They can help bring it back into focus. They can help you see something that is still kind of blurry to you. You know, there's no weakness in asking for help. That takes strength. When you can go to somebody and ask for help, that's a strength. Society would say, you don't need anybody. You can do it yourself. Well, if you could do it yourself, you wouldn't be in the position you're in. We need each other in society. You know, we're interdependent upon each other, as we talked about in the character unit in the ripple effect chapter. We really need each other, and we have to put these things into action because to take away action, you take away thoughts. We'll be a bunch of robots. That's not what society's supposed to be. And there's no enjoyment in the robotic idea of society. You know, we're supposed to enjoy life, but we're supposed to enjoy life not at the expense of everyone else. But notice here, it says thoughts like, I'm so stupid I can't do anything right. Or it doesn't matter what choice I make, I'm always wrong. You know, and I've heard that many times. It doesn't matter what I do, it's wrong anyway. You're just going to tell me it's wrong. Well, if you keep doing what's wrong, then yeah, you're always going to hear that it's wrong. And the hardest thing to get someone to do is to admit what I'm doing is wrong. That could be for ourselves, individualizing this. Remember, we're talking about us. And when someone comes to us and points out, hey, you can't do something like that. You got to do it this way. What do? Do we get offended? You know, do we say things inappropriate? Or do we just look at someone and go, well, I don't really know how to do it then. I'm only doing what I know how to do. If you tell me a different way and show me, I can do it. But someone's got to show me. You know, and that can be something that makes the difference. And how we interact with others is also a very important part of that, because it's very easy for us to be very negative to other people and bring them down with criticism. When I say criticism, it's telling someone they did something wrong without teaching them how to do it right. Telling someone they did something wrong is not criticism. You know, if you see someone, as I heard a great teacher one time give an example of a child who's walking in the dark and there's a well in front of them with no protection. And they keep on going, they're going to fall right down the well. Getting their attention, hey, what you doing? Watch where you're going there. There's nothing wrong with that. Keeping somebody from hurting themselves, there's nothing wrong in that. I seen in, I don't remember what country it was, but where a child fell down a well, 105 foot, they got the child out of the well, but the child still died. And I thought about that scenario that teacher gave when I heard that in the news about the child that fell in the well. Because that's actually more common than you think. You see that in the news in other countries a lot. The United States, there's kind of rules to keep them safe. Some countries, they're just exposed. But once again, criticism isn't correcting someone. Criticism is telling someone they did it wrong without offering any help in how to fix it. That's criticism. Just putting someone down for the sake of putting them down. But once again, we're talking about being our own best critic. So if we're going to tell ourselves we broke it, we need to tell ourselves, well, we need to find out how to fix it. We need to find out how to do it right. So once again here, continuing on, it says, if you believe that you can't do anything right, then you'll put forth no effort in making right decisions. You totally cut yourself off. It's not worth it. I'm not going to do it. You can become very mentally lazy. And mental laziness doesn't improve, it doesn't help, it doesn't grow anyone. Notice here it says people will get into the habit. And once again, how do we form a habit? It takes practice, right? Practice forms habits. That can be bad habits, negative habits, or positive habits. They both take practice. But people get into the habit of thinking negatively about themselves are more likely to get talked into experimenting with risk-taking behaviors such as premarital sex, drugs, and even crime. They tend to have I have nothing to live for, so I might as well do whatever. That attitude. In a study done on former drug and alcohol abusers, a common thread was found. These persons all reported having negative thoughts about themselves and their abilities. This left them feeling as if their lives were worthless and that they were failures. When you think about what society has and the people we have in society, there's some jobs that seem extremely simplistic. I've been online and I've watched people do things. I've watched people who can weld really well. And I've had to wear a certain type of glasses to do it. But I'm not a welder, but I've always been interested in how, I know there's people that blob, and that's all it broke. I don't know why. And then I've seen people that can really weld, and that amazes me that the trait they do, because if you've ever tried it, and I have, someone was having a lot of patience with me as I was just making blobs. But when someone learns how to do that, and it's a very neat, clean job, it's impressive. When you try to do it and you realize how it's pretty difficult, not as easy as you think. But some people can master that to get it down really well. Same thing with cooking. There's different things that people can do where they become extremely efficient. And we consider them, that's just a basic job. I remember working in a restaurant when I was a young man, and the guy that taught me how to wash dishes, he moved so fast, I didn't see how in the world he got them clean. And then when I went to the other side of the dishwasher, I realized he doesn't get them clean. There's still food on them when they come out of the dishwasher even. Because you would slide them in one side, guy would be here, slide them through this big dishwasher, they come out here. My job was to take the clean ones, they're all supposed to be clean, stack them, give him back the dirty ones. Most of the time I could just take the whole rack and hand them back around. And then the owner of the restaurant came in one day, and I was talking to him, and I was only like 15, and I said, the dishwasher don't work very well. What are you talking about? And I said, man, these dishes, he sends them through, they're always dirty. Well, you're not doing it right. He looks like he's doing it pretty well to me. He came over there, the guy that owned the restaurant. He was much faster than the guy who impressed me already. And the thing I noticed the first thing he did was grab a scrubber. He scrubbed every dish, and as he was moving, putting them in, moving way faster, more efficient. When the dishes come out, they were perfectly clean. Totally different. He was very efficient. And then he walked off. He goes, dishwasher's fine. I said, but you didn't tell me how you fixed it. You didn't tell me what you did differently. I mean, I sent him with a brush. At 15, it meant nothing. And then he goes, oh, I'll tell you later. And finally, at the end of the day, I said, so what did you do that was different? He said, I scrubbed each one. That's what I did. You got to scrub the food off before you put it in the dishwasher. And that's always sound kind of crazy to me. You got to clean the dish before you put it in the dishwasher. But, watching him do it, I realized you can be fast and you can do it right. But he was very efficient. And I realized that what he was doing, he's the owner of this business, but man, he'd done that for a long time to get that fast and that efficient. And that was considered like one of the bottom end jobs. But he knew what he was doing and he knew how to do it very well. So, when someone comes to you and they offer you some advice, I would have never thought he'd even stuck his hand in the dishwasher. Sometimes we probably should step back and go, that person might know what they're talking about. And if they don't know what they're talking about, go to someone else. But if they do know what they're talking about, be mindful. And we're talking about positive character here. Once again, self-control. Self-control is learning to control the way you think about yourself. So self-control, auto-control, controlling yourself. By examining or critiquing your behavior for the purpose of improving yourself, once again, examining and critiquing. So that's looking at it, seeing where it's wrong, and fixing it. Not setting back, looking, see where it's wrong, and hell, I give up. Just won't work. That's more criticism than critiquing. But once again, by examining and critiquing your behavior for the purpose of improving yourself, you are practicing self-control. That's only part of it, but that's a huge part of it. On the other hand, when you persist in thinking about yourself in a negative way and make no attempt, underline that word no, make no attempt to change your behavior, you are not practicing self-control. You are being your own worst critic. So once again, it's someone who practices self-control. Someone who practices self-control is building a foundation for a positive character. Doesn't say someone who is a perfect human being. No, someone who is practicing. They're making it a habit. That helps them become a positive person. It helps them to develop a positive character. And the key word is practicing. They're practicing doing this. They're not giving up. They're continually doing it. So once you are down on yourself, it's really easy to stay down. Continuing to wallow in negative thoughts, it takes self-control to learn to replace negative thoughts with positive ones. And if you ever have a problem, if you ever think that it's just not worth it, I just can't seem to get out of it, a lot of people, they consider that, we have a lot of horrific things that take place in society. And we've talked about in these classes how teen suicide is a huge problem in society. In the United States, specifically what I'm speaking of is the United States in general. It's a huge problem. We say it's a problem, but what do we do about it as a society? Well, we'll form a hotline here. We'll pass out some ribbons. Don't do it. If you feel bad, call this hotline. Not saying the hotline doesn't help for people that are able to call the hotline. And if you ever notice when someone has a family member, especially they would say role model, I say movie star, singer, so forth. I've noticed in the last couple months there have been some singers and movie stars, their children committed suicide, and they all post, please call this number. They don't say the child committed suicide, but they say, please share this and help people in their lives by posting this number, and it's a suicide hotline. And I'm not saying the suicide hotline cannot be helpful, but most people, when they're contemplating suicide, aren't considering making a phone call. They're thinking about taking their life. And that thought just didn't pop up in their head instantaneously. There's a lot of that spiraling down to the point that life's not worth living. Well, one thing that we should think about is, do we actually play a role like that in anyone's life that we can think of where we could be putting people down, where we could be adding to their detriment? Because think about what we say and how we interact. Are we doing anything to put someone in that position? And then, if we feel that someone's putting us in that position, Go to a guidance counselor. Go to a trusted person. You have to speak with someone. Communication is the key to solving problems. Don't ever look at this and think that giving up is the answer. No one will ever miss me anyway. Well, yeah, they would. And there's a purpose that you haven't even fulfilled yet. There's a whole life to live, and there's a whole goal to reach. Sometimes it's just readjusting and seeing the value in our own lives. Once again, page 13. This is the page you notice in the lesson plan. It had a comma there and kind of skipped through it, but this goes along with procedure 5, and it says you wouldn't consider someone else as a friend who put you down and called you names, so don't do this yourself. Don't do this to yourself. Don't do this to yourself. Once again, you can write this down. We talked about self-respect in the acceptance unit on page 6. We covered that. We'll get to self-respect in the respect unit in chapter 4 eventually. But just write those notes down so you'll have them. But think about there's certain sayings that people have. This is a saying that helps. I know Napoleon once made the comment, when you see your enemy making a mistake, don't stop him. Okay, how does that help you? It doesn't. Joseph Stalin once said that we would not share our guns with our enemies, so why should we share our ideas with our enemies when they are more important than our guns? And you think about this as a society, we're a very broken society. And I'm not trying to speak against France or Russia or whatever. I think as a society, everybody has something positive to offer. Russia, China, the United States, from the smallest Malta island out there to some of the largest countries of India and so forth. Everybody has something positive to offer our society. But we're stuck right now. We're too busy criticizing each other as a society. We're too busy. If you're from Russia right now, people will just look at you in a negative way. If you're in the United States, if you're someone from Ukraine, you'll be looked at in a certain way. Someone from China will be looked at in a certain way. We just had that long ago here in New York City where there was a lot of attacks on Asian people. Why? Because they were Asian. Well, why did people start hating Asians so much all of a sudden? Well, because it was fed, and I'm not blaming media, but that's the outsourced venue that most people digest their intake of, you can say news, entertainment, whatever you want to call it, that forms these thoughts in their minds. It's all China's fault. That's the reason I'm broke. That's the reason Walmart doesn't have what I want right now. It's because China's fault. Well, no, not really. It's not really, that way. We think, go ahead and turn over to the next page, but what we're seeing here in our society, I was talking to a person the other day, and they were talking about building houses. And they were saying how it could be that when you build a house, you just went to Lowe's or Home Depot or whatever your lumber store you went to. You just bought what you needed and left. Now you can go, you're going to pay astronomically high prices, and half the stuff you need won't be there. And that's considered strange. But when we went to Trinidad and Jamaica and Argentina and down into Mexico, that's normal life for all of those people. And when you live on an island, you don't exactly just go to the next city or drive across to the next state and pick it up. When you're living on an island that you can drive from, 1 hour from the top to the bottom, it's not exactly going to grow off the tree the next day. It can take time to get these things processed. But we as Americans have become very spoiled into, well, we want it, kind of like Burger King told us. We want it our way or our way right now. That's how we want it. Well, that's not exactly how it works. And if we want it better, if we want things better, we got to contribute to it. I know things, when you look out in society right now, it's easy to get depressed. But we shouldn't be getting depressed because the local, Walmart doesn't have all the things they used to have. That's not something to get depressed over. It's, well, I used to love these little trinkets, and now I can't find them anywhere. Well, what did you do with them? I don't know. I kept losing them. So we have to start looking at life and thinking, we should consider ourselves in a way that we get things in our country that we're in. And I know there's people watching in other countries. We have things at our fingertips other people could only dream of having. And we criticize those people. You know, there's terms we have for people that cross the Rio Grande that are very degrading. And I was in a meeting here not long ago with some people, and they were saying, we need to take every one of these illegals and send them back. I was like, I bet the Indians said that about us too. You know, but we didn't go anywhere, did we? We're still here. And I told them, I asked them, I said, have you ever been there? You ever been to any of these countries in South America or, the Central America? You ever been to any of those? If you live there, I've been to them many times. I'd be coming across that river too if I was them. It's not a great place to live. Whenever you work 80 hours a week and you make $70 US, and the price of gas and food is almost the same cost, it's not a great place to live. And when we criticize these people for it, we should think about the wealth we have as a society. And think about this, because get this in the mind of your students. Instead of criticizing other people, why don't we find ways to help other people have a benefit in their own country, in their own city? People in the United States move all the time for better life, better job. When you watch the news, most the people you're watching on the news that are broadcasters aren't even Americans. They have dual citizenship, or they came in from another country. Canada is a very popular country that all of our news people come from, anchors, so forth. And it's very popular. But we look at this and we think, well, we made America what it is. No, we didn't. We're living in what was made, We're making it either better or worse with what we're doing. And I'm not trying to judge, but I think it's went downhill since I've been born. I think it's kind of been on a spiral. And I was born in the 70s. And from my aspect of what I've seen in life, I think things are very much more complicated and not as desirable as it used to be. And I'm not blaming politicians. I'm saying as a society, we went from working for it to just give it to me. And that's not very beneficial. Well, looking over to page 14, notice it's not just about you. Control the way you think about others. And that's what I'm trying to explain for. If you've ever been to other countries, and I know it's a challenge to do that now, I think it's a great experience for people to go see what other countries are like and to see the experiences that they go through. To see people have to carry water for 3 miles just to get fresh water. And I think about it and I think, well, I'm glad I live in the country and I drink well water. I'm glad. Because if I lived in the city and if I had to drink this recycled sewage they send me in the pipeline, I'd probably rather go walk the 3 miles to get my water. But knowing me, I'd be too lazy to walk the 3 miles and I'd eventually break down to drinking the sewer water that was coming through my pipeline. And then I'd wonder, why is everything hurting now? Well, it's because it's not very clean. And if you have any questions on that, just Google it, please. You'll find endless videos. Just type in Flint, Michigan or something like that, and you'll find a lot. But control how we think about others, the way we perceive others, whether they're Russian, Chinese, Mexican, El Salvadorian, Honduran. Think about how we perceive others, how we see others. Think about this mindset we already perceive when we give very derogatory names to people to identify them because they're trying to come for a better life or they're trying to come to get out of what they're in. And everybody with this attitude, send them back to where they came from. Well, if you're going to send them back, give them something better than what they came from, or they're just going to turn around and come back. If you've never seen it, when you're at the border, I spend a lot of time at the border because it's not a very fast place. But I'll watch people come back, and I've asked them before as I'm standing on the other side in another country. So what are you guys going to do? I'm going to go get something to eat, and I'm going to go back across. They just spent all this money sending them over, and he's just going to go get something to eat, and they're all getting ready to go right back across. The sun will set, and they'll be back over where they just sent them from. Okay, that's not fixing problems. That's not making society better, and criticizing them isn't going to help either. So we can't be self-centered. We have to consider others. We have to consider what we think, how we perceive, and if we see something wrong, instead of criticizing it, find a way to fix it. We're going to stop right here because this will give William a great place to start on, because William has spent a lot of time dealing with people from other countries and that speak other languages, and he'll be our next teacher. And, these things come into play when you're a peaceful solution instructor. And even in schools today, you have just a huge difference, of groups of people. And, the spectrum is from one end to the other of people we have and origins and all of these things. And we have to find a way to make all of that work. And we went through that in the acceptance unit, but now we're going to apply it into thought and action. So we're going to stop at this point here on page 14. Our next class will be on 2/13. That'll be this Sunday, and it'll be at 5:30 p.m. Thank you for joining us.